Plato's Apology is a book that collects a series of speeches by his influential teacher Socrates, speeches that were given in Socrates' own defense before a court as he was being tried for impiety, for questioning the Greek gods, and also for corrupting the youth because he encouraged them to always question the status quo. In the sentencing phase of Socrates' trial, he was given a choice of exile where he would never be able to teach philosophy again, or death by execution. And he chose execution because, as he stated to the court, the unexamined life is not worth living. George Bernard Shaw was an Irish playwright and political activist whose influence on Western culture cannot be overstated. He once stated that few people think more than 2 or 3 times a week, but he managed to achieve international recognition by thinking as often as once a week. And that's according to S. Morris Ingles' study of philosophy. The term philosophy compounds 2 Greek words, which are literally phileo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. So philosophy means a love of wisdom. And there's nothing wrong with that. We should love wisdom. And although not all secular philosophy is good, the best philosophers are those who urge proper thinking, which includes both logic and ethics. Things upon which I agree with the 2 philosophers just quoted is that the unexamined life really isn't worth living, and that few people do think more than once or twice a year. The scriptures agree that wisdom is a worthy pursuit, and I believe that the foundation of all wisdom is found in the scriptures, which I believe to be the final arbiter of truth. And if we are to determine between right and wrong, we must examine it in light of the scriptures. And some of its books are written to enable the pursuit of wisdom, one of those being Proverbs, a collection of sayings by Solomon and others who basically tell us how to live the good life. But how do you live the good and godly life? How are you a good and godly person and not become a naive simpleton? Well, Proverbs has the answer to many of those questions, or many of the answers to those questions. And the book begins in chapter 1 with a purpose statement according to Proverbs 1, 2 through 5. Here's why the book was written. For gaining understanding and instruction, for understanding words of insight, for receiving instruction in prudent behavior, doing what is right and just and fair, for giving prudence to those who are simple, knowledge and discretion to the young. Let the wise listen and add to their learning, and let the discerning get guidance. So the Proverbs are of value to the wisest of sages, and also to the simplest of youth. They are valuable to anyone who will find oneself immersed in them, the simple, the young, the wise. They can all come here for guidance. The wise can add to their learning and become lifelong learners, and so there's an intellectual component to biblical wisdom. That doesn't mean that one has to have a formal education to be wise, but one does need to keep on learning. And the Lord gave us a mind to think with, and He expects us to use it. In addition to the wise who study Proverbs and add to their learning, and the value of the Proverbs to the simple as well, it says that they are for giving prudence to those who are simple. To understand that, we need to understand what prudence is and then what it means to be simple. And we'll cover both of those. First, we'll talk about prudence. A wise person will be a prudent person. And a prudent person is one who thinks before one speaks, acts or looks before one leaps. They listen before they speak. They deliberate before they decide, and they reflect before they rush in. They calculate, contemplate, and consider. Major decisions involving marriage, finance, health, and religion are all going to be prudently made. But the truly wise know that even the seemingly mundane, day-to-day things that we do in life can have a profound and lasting impact. What we say to other people, how we treat them, what kind of work we do, and how we spend our time, all can have a lasting impact. And so the prudent person puts thought into life. As Proverbs 14:8 says, the wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways. The term way or path is often used as a road. And in Proverbs, it is a metaphorical road. It's the path that you take in life. It's the road that you follow, the way that you travel. And yes, life is a highway. But no one travels solo, and everyone is going somewhere. Your route determines your destination, and your driving affects the lives of those around you. You may not know it, but your influence is such that on long stretches of the journey, you are taking others along with you. So the prudent person thinks about where life is taking them and where they want it to take them, and how others are affected by their journey. The wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways. They aren't just making life up as they go, but they are deliberate about it. They are intentional about it. But too many people are living the unexamined life, and they're out for gaining temporary gratification. They want to acquire all the temporary pleasure that they can without much thought to the future or how their actions are affecting other people. There isn't much planning, reflection, or contemplation. Some just go through life reacting out of emotion or anger or allegiance to whatever group's ideology best fits their special interests. Or they go through life defining the status quo or defending the status quo, rather, because it's what they're taught. And they've never really thought outside the box. And it takes a lot of effort. It's dangerous to think outside the box because people will judge you. People will exclude you if you think outside the box that they put you in. And frankly, some are too cowardly to think outside the box. They're happy to stay within whatever perimeters others have drawn for them. And in so doing, they miss out on a lot of truth. But don't get me wrong, sometimes the perimeters others draw for us are not bad, but we have to think it out to see. Is there a better way than what we've been doing? Is there a better way of understanding? Have we tried to understand even the other side, the side that doesn't think like we do? See, it's dangerous to fall into any ideological commitment because no one side is ever right all the time, and no one side is ever wrong all the time. But most, I think, just stake out their territory and live or die by that claim. And they don't bother to ponder whether or not they share any common ground with their neighbors. But the prudent give thought to their ways. Why am I doing this? Why is this true? Do I even know that this is true? Is there any evidence? The prudent who give thought to their ways are contrasted with the simple in verse 15, where we read, the simple believe anything, but the prudent give thought to their steps. So we've talked about the prudent. Who is the simple in this text? The simple are those who haven't learned to think things through. Maybe they lack experience. Maybe they lack education, not necessarily formal education, but even informally. Maybe their lives are on autopilot as opposed to taking action. They simply react to what happens to them. Now, there is such a thing as overthinking things and perhaps overcomplicating what should be simple. And I think sometimes, even in Bible classes, we do that with Scripture. We take a line of Scripture that is pretty apparent what it means at face value, but we overanalyze it and we scrutinize it and we turn it inside out and upside down and backwards and forwards. And by the time we're done, we're not even sure what it means anymore. And sometimes the face value answer is the best because not everything in Scripture is supposed to be a riddle. But on the other hand, we can oversimplify the complexities of life. It was Einstein who said, everything needs to be made as simple as possible, but not simpler. But the simple person is described here, someone who doesn't want to be bothered with the facts. They just want to believe what they want to believe. They just want to think what they think they already know. And that is why in verse 15, the simple believe anything. So why do you believe the things that you believe? Do you believe something just because it's what your parents believe? Do you believe something because it's what you read on the internet? Do you believe something because it was in the latest Facebook or Instagram meme, and then did you share it with all your friends without checking out to see if it was true? Are you inclined to automatically believe something because someone from your tribe or your group says that it's true, or because some smooth, charismatic leader or talented celebrity said it? Do you believe something because your professor said it, or even because your preacher said it? Do you believe something because you heard it on radio or you saw it on TV? Have you heard the arguments from the other side before they were filtered by whatever media it is that you listen to, before they put their spin on it? Do you know that there are only 6 corporations that control 90% of mainstream media? And each of their corporate interests is served by how they can manage to persuade the masses. The simple are those who have not learned to think critically. They just blindly follow their leaders. And I know that whoever you are, you're probably thinking about those people on the other side, those people who disagree with you, those people in the other camp. Actually, I'm talking to you. I'm talking to anyone who will listen. The simple are often naive. And how many times have we been naive? We say, I cannot believe I fell for that sales pitch. Or I can't believe I fell for that snow job. Or I can't believe I fell for that sob story. I can't believe how I allowed my emotions to be so manipulated. I cannot believe how I was drawn in by that charlatan. I should have known that this was a deal too good to be true. Well, we've all done something like that at one time or another. We've all been naive from time to time. But as we grow in wisdom, we learn to be more what Jesus encouraged in Matthew 10:16 when he sent his disciples out to evangelize. He said, be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. You cannot be wise and be content to remain a simpleton. Don't be like the simple who believe anything, but be like the prudent who give thought to their steps. Back in verse 8, the wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deception. To not give thought to one's ways is folly, which leads to deception. And it's simple. If the simple believe, anything without serious evaluation, then they'll obviously be deceived in many ways. And to continue in such folly is to make the full transition from being simple to just being a fool. And fools are easily deceived. But even the wisest among us can be duped. Everyone plays the fool at times. We all make mistakes, and sometimes costly ones. And there are no guaranteed outcomes in this life. No guaranteed outcomes. Sometimes, however much you calculate and contemplate and consider, things just aren't going to work out because there are so many variables. As verse 12 puts it, there is a way that appears to be right, but in the end, it leads to death. Yes, there are some miscalculations that lead to death. There are some wrong turns and misdirection that can cost lives. But looking at death even as a metaphor here for a bad outcome, we can sometimes do our research, take every precaution, act with all the prudence we can muster, but still fail to control the outcome. But there is a difference between losing because you aren't in total control and losing because you're either a naive victim or an outright fool. And God doesn't want you to be a naive victim. He doesn't want you to be ignorant. And so he gave us the Bible, specifically Proverbs, to help us acquire wisdom, to live the good life. And to live the good life is not about possessing material items and controlling other people, but living the good life is about possessing wisdom and controlling ourselves. The wise can appreciate what they have, cope with their losses, and build the most meaningful of relationships. The opposite of being wise is to be a fool. And some foolish traits are laid out in this section of Proverbs 14. In verse 9, fools mock at making amends for sin, but goodwill is found among the upright. The literal Hebrew of this verse, as reflected by some translations, indicates that fools mock at presenting guilt offerings to the Lord. And guilt offerings were sacrifices to atone for wrongs. But since it doesn't occur to the fool that he is ever wrong, he doesn't need or doesn't see the need. He needs, but he doesn't see the need to ask for forgiveness. And someone who does not ask God for forgiveness does not understand the most basic foundation upon which Christianity is built. We are sinners in need of forgiveness, and until we're forgiven, we have no avenue to God. But as some will fail to ever admit to God that they were wrong, Many more will never apologize to anyone else. Some people don't even know how to apologize. But see, there's a right way and there's a wrong way. And one of the wrong ways to apologize is to say to the offended party, if you are offended by my actions, I am sorry. What? What kind of a lame excuse for an apology is that? If you are offended by my actions, that takes the burden and lays it right back on the offended party. It says, the problem is not with me, the problem is with your perception of me. And so it's not a real apology. Or another way to apologize the wrong way, or to attempt to, is to say, well, if you hadn't pushed my buttons, I would not have thrown that rock through your window. And again, that's putting the burden on the offended party. You're saying what you did caused me to do what I did, and so I'm somehow justified in it. And so that's another lame excuse for an apology. Why don't even bother to apologize if that's what you call an apology. The right way to say an apology, the right way to apologize is to utter two phrases of 3 words each. The first phrase, I was wrong. I was wrong. And the second, I am sorry. I was wrong and I'm sorry. That is how you apologize without reservations. No one way, so one way to give thought to your way of life is to reflect upon your wrongs and to be ready to make amends. A second way is to admit that you don't have everyone pegged. Verse 10 says, each heart knows its own bitterness, so no one else can share its joy, and no one else can share its joy. Here is one reason we cannot be anybody's judge. Sure, we can judge if someone's behavior is right or wrong, because we got the Bible, but we can't judge them in terms of their motives for what they do, and we cannot judge their eternal destiny, because that is God's job, because only God knows people's hearts. Christians need to learn as much as anyone that we're not God, we're not the judges, but we can get caught up in assuming the worst about someone based upon reports we've heard, which may or may not be true, or we might read someone's motives into their actions, and those might not be their motives at all. But we cannot see the heart, and each heart knows its own bitterness. What you see on the surface doesn't always reflect what's inside. A person can mask their pain by pretending to be happy, and when someone is down and out, one of the worst things we can say to them is, I know how you feel. Because we don't. We don't know how another person feels. Even if we've been through something similar, yeah, that helps us to empathize, but we still don't know how they feel because every situation is different. The most empathetic friend cannot really feel your pain or experience your joy. Now, they can mourn with you, they can rejoice with you, they can be happy for you, but their experience is not yours. So we don't have everyone pegged. Now, that doesn't mean you can't go to other people for advice and maybe value their advice more because they've had experiences before you did, but we don't have everyone pegged. And verse 13 says, even in laughter the heart may ache, and rejoicing may end in grief. Appearances can be deceiving. A person may appear happy when inside they are miserable because they don't want to trouble you with their problems, or they might appear sad because they want to play on your sympathy. And people may at times appear to have permanence and security, but what they have is very far from being permanent or secure. In verse 11, the house of the wicked will be destroyed, but the tent of the upright will flourish. The contrast here is between the house and the tent. The house appears to be a more stable structure. It's more secure in a storm. It's more secure from thieves. Some houses have lasted for over 100 years, but the tent is very temporary. It doesn't have a foundation. It may not fare well in stormy weather or against intruders. And it seems that at times some of the wicked are much better set than the righteous. The filthy rich who live off the backs of others, sometimes they have multiple houses. And sometimes the righteous are just trying to scrape together enough money to pay the rent. But who is better set for the future? The righteous, of course. Because, as the later part of verse 9 says, favor is found among them. And this is likely divine favor. And if you have the favor of God, then you have security and permanence, even if you live in a tent. You can live in a mansion with a solid foundation, locked doors, bars on the windows, guard dogs, a fence built around the perimeter, but no earthly fortress is permanent. If you're wicked, your life is counting down to a bad end, which has no future. And what is often true in life is even truer of the afterlife. As verse 14 says, the faithless will be fully repaid for their ways, and the good rewarded for theirs. The best rewards of this life are a good marriage, a loving family, attentive friends. There are purposes, goals, and joys along the way to make life meaningful, but those living without God are like the simple, who just kind of coast through life without a plan, well, not examining too much. And if you really want the good life, it only comes by a relationship with God through faith in His Son, Jesus Christ.